Hello, and welcome to the first episode of a new series I'm calling Indie Hour, where I plan on diving into smaller games from independent developers with the aim of highlighting and hopefully praising entries in this particular genre of the games industry, amidst the sea of huge, high-budget AAA releases that always strive on pleasing mass audiences with more and more content. Instead, I wish to shine a light on the titles that take a lesson in brevity, and the studios that are producing them, even with a restricted budget and fewer people working on them, proving themselves and their place within the industry. So, let's get started. Today, we're taking a look at Copenhagen-based Danish studio Playdead's first title, that being Limbo. Initially released in July of 2010, Limbo is a side-scrolling 2D platformer built heavily with puzzle-solving elements. Now, I adore a good side-scroller, and have since I can remember, that love spanning back to my childhood and rooted mainly in Super Mario. This game, however, is far from the bright, colourful worlds of the Mushroom Kingdom, but in the best way possible. The game begins with us watching the silhouette of a boy awaken on the forest floor and get to his feet. Where is he? How did he get here? Where even is here? Well, those details are absent from the game itself, and even official sources are still in keeping with the premise of the game remaining vague at most. The description of the game itself listed on storefronts is but a single sentence. Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters Limbo. After completing the game, I feel even this was too much information, and my reasoning on that shall make itself apparent in due course. From the beginning, you have to figure things out for yourself. There are no on-screen pop-ups, tutorials, or prompts to get you started, and this is true for your entire playthrough. Even if you do look at the controls, there are only 3 inputs that you can even make when playing, making this video game a perfect entry point for someone who hasn't even held the game's controller in their life. And this act of keeping things minimal and simple is a consistent trait regarding all the building blocks of the game. The first few minutes are crafted to introduce you to the basic gameplay mechanics and the physics in Limbo. As expected, horizontal movement across the X-axis includes walking, jumping and climbing, either to the left or right, and interactable objects like carts with well-defined protruding handholds easily highlight when it's possible to grasp and manoeuvre an in-game object. Gameplay feels weighty, responsive, and the opening itself, despite soon realising that you are being fed very sparse information, if any at all, does an excellent job of showcasing that the game relies heavily on physics and motion, letting you figure out for yourself how player movement, along with platforming and the manipulation of objects, function under the influence of gravity, all while making you aware of what is climbable and available to interact with, such as the presence of a rope and a small boat placed in the beginning section. This is where you're introduced to the puzzle solving in the game, starting you off with one that is simple and quick to solve, but not blatantly obvious to first time players. The initial puzzle here being a ledge, just slightly out of reach, encourages the player into thinking about not only pushing onwards towards the right, but also taking the time to remember the previously completed portion of the game that still exists behind us, and in which may lie the solution to our current problem. The puzzles progressively get more difficult as the game continues, some having you narrowly avoid obstacles, and others taking what you've already learnt about the game and using that against you, duping you out as you walk right into them. Failing puzzles and deaths by association aren't used in a punishing way, just as a method to keep you guessing, trial and error functioning as the foundation for the satisfaction you feel upon completing one, with your timing of certain jumps, rope swings and lever pulls needing to be more and more impeccable the further into Limbo you go. Environmental puzzles, however, are only the beginning of our problems, as we are soon met with the first of many dangers in the world, whatever this world truly is. Bear traps lie very nearly hidden throughout the game, blending in with the foreground and resulting in instant death should you end up near its teeth. Dangers like these almost feel expected, despite not coming across any thus far. The world in which we inhabit and the way in which it's presented to us give a sense that this game is trying to make you feel a certain way, and this is hardly just a mere coincidence. The way Limbo is presented with its artistic style is very minimalistic. Not only is this a 2D platformer, already restricting the visuals to one plane with a fixed point of view, but in this world, on this plane, exists this gloomy atmosphere which the team clearly envisioned and wished to feed us with. The designs of what we see are all basic, nothing is highly detailed, and the details that are put into certain designs are only done so with a specific purpose, either to communicate to you, aiding you in gameplay, or to convey a particular mood or emotion that needs to be made apparent to the player, done through the game's core narrative method, visual storytelling. Limbo is presented through this palette of shadowy grayscale colours. Only blacks and greys are used in the game, alongside the occasional bright whites used to signify the very sparse amount of light found seeping its way throughout the cracks of this world. Most things are merely silhouettes, outlining easily recognisable objects that blend in, concealing themselves when they want to, with other aspects standing out when needed, such as our protagonist, whose only defining features are his hair, shorts, shoes, and bright eyes that stand out, guiding his way in this world of darkness. The only defining features of the landscape are also simple. Grass, some occasional patches overgrown, the odd group of fireflies, and rotten trees lying in your path, just to name a few examples. Despite the game being 2D, there is still size and scope to the world we're in, accomplished with a depth of field to the scenes we traverse across, the backgrounds in the distance being slightly better lit than that of the forefront to distinguish between the two, but with whatever lays behind you being blurry, giving a notion of mist and fog in which potential dangers could always be lurking. These simple layers work as world building, giving off an eerie and unsettling aesthetic. To add to this, Playdead accomplishes this foreboding sense of scale and vastness from the very beginning of the game in the forest, making you feel far smaller down here, knowing you're surrounded by huge imposing tree trunks reaching up into potentially infinite heights that extend past the limits of your screen. The screen itself has film grain filtered over it, a creative decision to purposely give the tone of genres like film noir, even drawing similarities to horror games, which is in keeping with other aspects of the game I've mentioned so far. Despite this, Limbo is far from a horror game. I'd consider it horror-esque, but there are no jump scares or particularly nightmarish elements, unless you have arachnophobia, in which case, good luck. It's all more so the tone and atmosphere that conveys the game's darker, creepier qualities. It's not the darkest game to ever exist, mind you. Wait a minute. Darkest and angriest game in the franchise? What does that even mean? This is helped along with the sound design and accompanying soundtrack by Martin Stig Andersen, which isn't composed with traditional instruments, but more deep synthetic noises and the occasional unidentifiable sound effect to keep you just disturbed enough. The audio of the backing soundtrack is distorted, other than the sounds made from objects you're meant to recognise, and much of the time there is a lack of any music in any form, leaving you with just the sounds of your footsteps and objects you're interacting with. In many cases, echoes from faraway noise sources in the distance accompany this, to keep you slightly on edge. There aren't any music cues for even key points in the game, in fact the opposite. Music is removed for what in any other game would be boss encounters, although even these larger threats are not displayed to us as such. It all compiles the atmosphere into a rather haunting, lonely one, conveying this tone that not many games manage to do, and that is only furthered with its story. Well, I say story. There isn't a lot to be said in terms of what the definitive plot of this game is, but that's what makes it bloody beautiful. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's intentional that the only knowledge we have going into this is that the boy is searching for his sister. We don't know where he is, how he got here, nor what became of his sister previously. Obviously, he cares for her, enough so that he's ventured here one way or another. From the game's title alone, we can gather this plane of existence is director Arndt Jensen's interpretation of Limbo, that being the purgatory of which you journey through after death on your way to the afterlife. The tone of the game easily communicates that this is a dark, gloomy place, barely lacking in life force of any kind, and the further you travel through it, the more questions are raised for you to come to a conclusion on yourself. All done very cleverly, not with cutscenes or dialogue, but pure environmental storytelling, as you have no clue on the threats in this world or how to overcome them, and only through what you see are you fed the yarn that helps you weave together this tale. This kind of environmental storytelling is key in areas such as the spider's den you unknowingly venture into, the only thing of note being the twigs and loose webs that dangle from the cave ceiling to make up this scene, things that only become relevant after you end up immobile and are soon enough woven into a cocoon, no doubt to be enjoyed as a tasty treat later on. As you journey ever onwards, you encounter man-made structures and traps laid in place to catch you out unawares, along with corpses left on display in cages or hanged on posts, potentially to ward off trespassers, serving as an example of what lies in fate for those who dare risk to tread any closer. You do soon encounter a very limited number of people, presumably those who constructed said rudimentary structures, serving as threats to you, brandishing weapons like boulders sent down inclines to crush you, or blow darts, you never obtaining any weapons yourself, as there is no combat in the game, making your only viable option using your own legs to run away. I don't know who else's legs you would use. What is communicated to you is all you need to know, and it's left open for the player to interpret what the hostile intentions of this group are. Maybe they're cannibals, and like the spiders, want to gobble you up. Or perhaps it's because they fear you, knowing that you are new to enter this place, someone that shouldn't be here. Visual cues such as the blow dart riddled corpse that lies near a group of enemies is the only thing you have to inform you that you do not want to end up with one of those darts embedded in your back yourself. Travelling deeper into the caverns, you find maggots lying in a body of water, a desire we don't have in common, given you share the same swimming capabilities here as John Marston, drowning instantly if you touch any water deeper than shoulder's depth. Why? Maybe the boy was never taught how to swim, due to him and his sister having lost their parents, who knows. Water doesn't only act as a danger in game to be avoided, but also as a tool later on in a few puzzles, forcing you to wield something you've grown accustomed to avoiding up to this point in the game, and going against your instincts so you can progress further. But the question remains unanswered as to why the water exists as something so hostile. Is it poisonous or riddled with disease? There are bodies floating in the cavern, I would say adding to the stomach-turning horror aspects of the game, as it forces you to walk on literal corpses amongst other things that are just uncomfy to do. I audibly gagged as I was playing this after hearing that. Why is it still moving? I found myself wondering why so many people had ventured into these caverns, especially given all the warnings placed outside. Perhaps the existence of what lurks in the forest is enough to take the risk, although smaller threats still exist deeper underground. Those in the water didn't meet that fate by that of their own will, rather by the maggots that had burrowed their way into their brains, which inevitably also happens to us. This is where an interesting twist in gameplay introduces itself, where you are fixed in movement to one direction, resulting in unfortunate missteps. You can resist the urge to move, but only by so much. The only way to overcome these mind-controlling critters is to give in to the fight against them and work with the conditions you are manipulated under, the ultimate goal of reaching your one friend in this world, the maggot-eating creatures embedded in the ceilings. Trust me though, it's harder than it sounds. I'll leave it to you to figure out how to overcome these sections. As you journey further on, mechanical puzzles and industrial ruins appear, seemingly long abandoned, but having to have been built by someone, you question who, and why build here? What was the purpose of this equipment? One mechanism has you trigger heavy rainfall, only adding to the question, what kind of world is this? In the following chapters you reach some rooftops, perhaps homes for industrial workers before they will abandon their posts. I wonder who, if any, remain. Towards the tail end of the game, you find yourself in a huge maze of complex machinery, cogs and buzzsaws, and you must navigate your way through these tight spaces as the world itself begins to rotate around you, introducing new gravity-based mechanics until you finally reach the final puzzle, breaking your way through a pane of glass to the other side. Now, if you haven't played Limbo, I can't really spoil the ending as such, given the point of it is that it's left open to interpretation, but I've seen a few theories on what the ending could be and the story as a whole could mean. Breaking through the glass could be the boy finally escaping Limbo and returning to reality. After all, it's neither confirmed nor denied that he is ever deceased or what befell his sister. Perhaps she isn't even dead, it's never said she is. A number of times in game you reach one area, turn around and then the landscape has changed, perhaps meaning this world is playing tricks on you, an illusion, and before the very ending you have this happen one final time, returning to the state in which you began the game, lying on the forest floor. This could be interpreted as an inescapable loop you have finally broken free from, or your entire journey having been a dream as you lay there all along. If you have played it, I'd love to know what you felt experiencing the title and what you interpreted the ending as, and if you haven't, I highly recommend giving it a go. It sits at a perfect length of around 2 to 3 hours, but I've seen people online speedrun it in a single hour, without dying, which I will not be attempting for my own sanity. So if you're looking for a quick game to get deeply immersed in to pass quiet night, I couldn't give you a better option, especially given it's cheap enough now and on sale frequently, bundled with Playdead's other game, Inside, which, you might see me reviewing later on, so look forward to that. It's even on mobile, so there's no excuse not to play it now. Do you guys not have phones? I adore that there's no answer to any of the questions proposed throughout Limbo. Everything here just is, and I feel that's what separates it from the norm. The only thing you're meant to be questioning is how the game makes you feel. What emotions does it render within you, and through what lens do you see your journey with Limbo once you've reached its end? At the start of the video, I mentioned how I didn't even like the premise that the boy was searching for his sister. I much preferred going into the game blind, not knowing who the person was or why we were seeking them, thinking that the story could be a metaphor for love, and I suppose it still could. Searching for someone who you find safety and peace with at the end of a dangerous and desolate journey through this confusing terrain into the afterlife. or a visualization of grief and the pains and obstacles one must overcome on the journey to acceptance of someone you've lost. That's what makes it so perfect. It can mean something different to everyone, and I hope more indie devs follow suit with this method of storytelling. There is no answer to the narrative, other than whatever you interpret it to be, and that is why Limbo is a perfect example of how presentation, tone, and stripping down your methods of storytelling to the bare essentials through minimal environments and colour grading can result in an intimidating but hauntingly beautiful expression of art.